Hi, Assalamualaikum and very good morning. Today my group we're gonna present about containment and engagement. But before that, let me tell you about foreign policy. Do you know each country have their own foreign policy and there are many types of foreign policy. But what is foreign policy really is? Foreign policy is a general objective that guide the activities and relationship at one state in its interaction with other states. The development of foreign policy is influenced by domestic consideration, the policies of behavior of other states, or plans to advance specific geopolitical designs. There are several types of foreign policy, such as isolationism, preemption, containment, selective engagement, intervention, and interdependence. However, I will explain more about containment and engagement. What is containment? Containment was a foreign policy strategy followed by the United States during the Cold War era. First laid out by George F. Kennan in 1947. The policies state that communism need to be isolated or contained, or else it will be spread to a neighboring country. American believe if one country have fall into communism, then the other country will fall as well, like a row of dominoes. Due to the policy of containment and domino theory, ultimately lead to U.S. intervention in Vietnam as well as Central America and Grenada. What about engagement? Engagement is defined as a diplomacy in a wider range, and be more specific, it is a contact of between an international actor and a foreign public, include public diplomacy, communication, and deployment of international aid. Both policies were used by United States administration, and both of these have a very significant differences. Containment was suggested by George F. Kennan to prevent the spreading of communism in America. By engagement was suggested by Barack Obama to build cooperation with other countries to achieve own interests and bilateral interests. Next, I will pass to my friends to explain more about containment and engagement.
Okay, so let me explain about the containment, about the history of containment. So, containment started way back during the Cold War, which there was a fight between the United States of America and the Soviet Union to determine who was the most powerful at that time. US has created this policy, which is the containment. Containment is a policy to contain or stop the spreading of communism ideology. It was first created by George F. Kennan. However, what made the US even more worried is that after World War II, European Communist parties started to get more support, started to get more votes from the people. The main reason why US rejects communism, it is because United States is a capitalist country. It's a capitalist country where it depends heavily on the power of buying of the people, because they practice open market. So the more people buying, that will increase their economy very nicely. However, it's different for the communist countries. They don't let their people to buy their own properties. They don't let their citizens to buy their own properties, lands, or anything, because they practice equality. They emphasize on the equality. That means if this person can have A, that means the other person must have only A. So US is very worried if communist countries are successfully influencing other states, because they will lose a number of buyers. That will affect their economy badly, because if communism ideology influence in all the people, that will cause the people to not be able to buy anything, to not be able to do trade with other democracy countries. The first strategy that US did to stop the spreading of communism is, firstly, they created the Truman Doctrine, which created as a result of the support after they saw that many people have started to support the European Communist parties. They created this doctrine. So during the time of the Turkish Straits, they want to gain oil. They want to gain oil and stop the communist militia in Greece. So they give aid, they give help and assistance to the Turkish, about 400 million USD to the Greece and also Turkey, to stop the communists from like, like aiding, like helping them. Yeah, so they want to influence the people by giving more assistance and by more aid, so that the Turkish people will support the democracy states instead of the communism. Then, after the Truman Doctrine, they also created the Marshall Plan, which was named after George C. Marshall. The function of the Marshall Plan is to give economy aid, which included food, fuel, and also money to all countries in Europe. It's because they don't want any Europe countries to be influenced by the communism, because this happened during the Cold War, like the post after the World War II. So many countries, many European countries, were involved in the World War II. So there are so many damages. There are so many damages. So they want to help them. They want to help them by giving more aid through this Marshall Plan. Then, after that, they also established the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. It is to provide mutual security against Soviet Union. It is stated in the Article 5 of the treaty, if one state of the members of the NATO is attacked, is equal as attacking the whole organization, which is, let's say, if country A is attacked, and country A is the member of the NATO, then that means the other states will help this country to mutually fight together the one that attacks. So if they establish the NATO, the Soviet Union can't possibly attack them, because the whole members of the NATO will together fight against the Soviet Union. And of course, this organization believes the same ideology, which is the democracy ideology. So most of the countries, not most, but all the countries in NATO believed in the democracy ideology, and they also practice the open trade. Through the NATO, the organization will protect the members, which is the states, through the political and also the military means. Our group did a case study regarding the US intervention in the Korean War. So Korean War began on June 25th, 1950, which involved the North Korea and also the South Korea. It started because North Korea has launched an attack on South Korea, and it was recorded as the first military action of the Cold War. So when North Korea launched the attack, US intervenes because North Korea was conquered by the communists, while South Korea is conquered by the democracy states. Thus, US didn't want North Korea to win, because if North Korea wins, that means communism like South Korea will be a communist state as well. So they were most afraid about that. So it is because it is also affected because of the domino effect suggested by President Dwight D. Eisenhower, which discussed about the fall of French Indochina to communists will give effect to all the Southeast Asia. So US is worried that if South Korea if South Korea lose to communism, that will affect the whole Asia. So they wanted to stop that. Obviously, they want to stop that. So US has asked help from the United Nations, and fortunately during that time, United Nations has been boycotted North Korea. So that makes the proposal even easier, because and UN give assistance to government in Seoul, as they do not want the other communist country, as they do not want as they want to prevent the war from getting bigger, because they don't want any other communist states to join the war, because it will cause like money and all, right? So then UN help them to faster the result. In conclusion, U.S. containment policy in Korean War is considered a success because on July 27th, an armistice is signed at Panmunjom, which caused the current Korea, which is the North Korea and South Korea, it is the point where North Korea and South Korea divided into two countries, and one practice communism and another one is practicing the democracy, which is the North Korea practiced communism ideology, while the South Korea practiced the democracy ideology.
Now let's talk about engagement. According to Wikipedia, engagement is applied in diplomacy as a synonym for a wider range of more specific practices of contact between an international actor and a foreign public. This includes public diplomacy, communication, and the deployment of international aid. From this statement, we can summarize the term engagement in foreign policy as a method used by a country to be involved in other countries' situation. Although engagement is used mostly by leaders, it actually refers to the involvement of international actors. There are two types of international actors, which is the state actors and the non-state actors. Example of state actors is the Prime Minister, President, or any state governmental body. Meanwhile, example of non-state actor is the Human Rights Council or even the terrorist group Al-Qaeda. Engagement is also known as smart power, which is the combination of soft and hard power. From this statement, we can summarize the term engagement in foreign policy as a method used by a country to be involved in other countries' situation. Although engagement is used mostly by leaders, it actually refers to the involvement of international actors. There are two types of international actors, which is the state actors and the non-state actors. By engaging with other countries, a particular country can widen its influence and shall bring benefits in the future. Public diplomacy, which is a component of engagement, aims to seek understanding between countries. Thus, engagement is a policy used by many countries to prevent war outbreak and conduct negotiations to achieve their national interests. By the way, it can also increase the number of allies for a certain country. Now let's take a look at several of the advantages and the disadvantages of engagement. The first one is the advantages. Engagement could resolve conflict and build peace in serious situations. For example, China's emergence as a global power is considered a threat to the United States of America. During President George W. Bush's term as President of the United States, he had chosen the approach of engagement, and US-China relations were improving significantly. It is vital for the leaders to acknowledge the country's foreign policy, and this is the challenge where they have to cooperate with other nations. Furthermore, international relation theories also emphasize that conflict resolution between rival countries must be solved through diplomatic engagement, either between state to state or leader to leader. Another good example is the US engagement towards Myanmar during Barack Obama's term as President of the United States of America. Their support for Aung San Suu Kyi, who is a pro-democracy leader of Myanmar, was to push the country's government towards democracy. It is also to prevent Myanmar from being fully dependent on China, and it is also the mission of United States of America to strengthen their relationship with ASEAN or Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Secondly, the advantage of engagement is that it could create a channel for economic, social, cultural, political, and technological knowledge among nations. Since the end of Cold War, the existence of World Bank, the International Monetary Fund (IMF), and the World Trade Organization (WTO) had become a platform for the United States to conduct its international economic strategy through engagement. United States consider themselves as the hegemon, the most democratic, and committed to peace and to fight for what is right. And regarding the trade war between China and US, despite the difficulty during negotiations, both sides have signed a preliminary deal which US has agreed to halve the new tariff that they impose on China, as the trade war does not only affect the countries but also on the global economy. Engagement also has its disadvantages. Firstly, it pushes towards narrow-mindedness and works for short terms only. This is due to the fact that leaders may seek for allies and diplomacy by the arts of communication only to avoid getting into deeper trouble. It also drives the leaders to let go of their responsibility by not standing up for the right thing. Instead, they have to act based on the terms provided. In addition, once a certain goal is accomplished, countries involved tend to shift allies according to their needs, which means allies can turn into enemies at any time. This causes the leaders not to appreciate and maintain the good relations between countries. Next, providing aid to a troubled country may cause greed and insincerity to arise. It is not an unusual situation where a certain country helps another country and asks for something in return. It also occurs in our daily life. They can make an agreement to reduce trade barrier, allowing more migration and other form of benefits as well. So it is a win-win situation. Still, a country might go overboard with their demands, but since the other country is desperate, they have to agree with the conditions. Thus, it is an unfair situation caused by greed. It is an unfair situation especially to a less developed country. Lastly, engagement between countries, as portrayed by the media, does not show the actual truth. They portray it nicely in order to convince people that everything ran according to the plan and everything was in favor, but what actually happened was not shown to the public. As a result, people do not really aware of the real condition of relationship between their countries and other countries. This causes misconception to arise between people. Case study of United States of America's engagement in Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The issue that seems to be a never-ending issue makes us wonder why the Israelis keep winning despite their act of violating the international law is condemned by people around the world. Well, the answer is the continuous support from the great political power of United States of America has always protected them from being punished. The US involvement in this issue is a form of engagement, which includes mostly military aid for the Israel Defense Force and great relationship between Israel and the US. The major problem between the Israelis and the Palestinians is the dispute over territories and the difference of religions. From the analysis of history, as long as Israel gains support from the United States and both sides, Israel and Palestine, claim that the disputed territories belongs to them, then we will not be seeing peace between them for a very long time. In order to understand the conflict, it is important to understand the history of it. The history of the Israeli-Palestinian fight began a very long time ago, but the conflict that led to the existing war started with the movement of Jews around the world to the Palestine. The movement took place between 1882 to 1948. After the World War I, right before Palestine was put under British power, King George V and Britain's government in the Balfour Declaration agreed to allow the provision for a homeland for the Jews in the Palestine. Besides, the Holocaust incident became a driving factor for the establishment. Then, in 1948, the Arab-Israeli War happened, followed by another war in 1967, which resulted in Israel taking over all disputed territory and also East Jerusalem and West Gaza, which was under Jordan's and Egypt's power respectively at that time. Until now, peace is still unachieved because both sides refuse to acknowledge both states. Furthermore, Hamas used Gaza as a place to launch rockets and mortar attacks, and Fatah took over the West Bank. Israel retaliated by placing Gaza under military control to block supplies for Palestinians. In order to understand the conflict, it is important to understand the history of it. The history of the Israeli-Palestinian fight began a very long time ago, but the conflict that led to the existing war started with the movement of Jews around the world to the Palestine. The movement took place between 1882 to 1948. After the World War I, right before Palestine was put under British power, King George V and Britain's government in the Balfour Declaration agreed to allow the provision for a homeland for the Jews in the Palestine. Besides, the Holocaust incident became a driving factor for the establishment. Then, in 1948, the Arab-Israeli War happened, followed by another war in 1967, which resulted in Israel taking over all disputed territory and also East Jerusalem and West Gaza, which was under Jordan's and Egypt's power respectively at that time. Until now, peace is still unachieved because both sides refuse to acknowledge both states. Furthermore, Hamas used Gaza as a place to launch rockets and mortar attacks, and Fatah took over the West Bank. Israel retaliated by placing Gaza under military control to block supplies for Palestinians.
In conclusion, both of the policy, containment and engagement, they have their own advantage and disadvantage. Each administrator that use one of the policy should be wise in managing it well. Each policy has its own management style. The policy used should be in accordance with the state of the country and help to achieve their own interests to the country. And US has shown that developing country can change its foreign policy based on the current circumstances. And foreign policy is one of the ways in which a country interacts with other countries. So foreign policy is one of the most important in forming partnership with other countries. US use containment policies as one of the ways to prevent the communism ideologies throughout the Europe. By the way, engagement is used to form partnership with other countries. This clearly shows that each country administrator have different motives in shaping their own country. So to make it clear, foreign policy helps in shaping social, economic, and political interrelationship, and the use of the right foreign policy is also very important in safeguarding the security of the country and the ideologies that the country brings.